good morning to all of you. Thank you so much for coming for my presentation. There are many interesting presentation sessions going on today and tomorrow in the conference. But I am going to talk about what are the two most important things for me and my studio in keeping the hunger for hyper-casual games. And these are patience and faith in our team, in our ideas, in our publishers. I am Aayush Agarwal, founder and CEO of BooBoo Games. I may not be available for the live QA. So there is my Skype ID over here, ayush.veritas. Please feel free to connect with me over Skype for any questions or any future reach outs. A little about us to start with. We started our company, our studio in March 2020 while India was in lockdown. It was just when the COVID started. So the entire team was working from home. We have designed, developed, failed, and learned in over 400 hyper-casual games in the last 20 months. So that gives us an average of designing, developing, testing around 20 games every month, which is a big number. However, this number is justified because our studio team size is around 40 members. So we can manage even more, but our focus is on quality as well as speed at the same time. Currently, we work with many leading publishers, top 10 publishers globally, and we have learned quite a lot from them in making our games better from where we started. The two things that are very important to us and which are driving us are patience and faith. We will go into details about this, but first, a little bit about what hyper casual games are about and what are important things in this hyper casual gaming industry. Most important KPIs initially. The word initially is important here because we are not talking about KPIs during soft launches or during when the game is published. I'm talking about here is the first test, the first time when your idea is executed and it is taken out to the mass and tested. CPI, as we all know, it's the cost per install. Ideally, it should be less than 30 cents, but 40 cents it gives you some room to iterate what you tested because there are high chances that you can bring it lower. The next is CTR, which is the click-through rate, which is an equally important parameter. The range varies depending on the network you're testing. On Facebook, it will be lower, around 4%. And while on audience network, it could be as high as 12%, 15%. Next very important parameter is D1 retention. It should be ideally over 35%. If you want to go into iterations, I think anything above 30% is still workable, but you need to go to around 40-45% range for the game to be able to make a lot of money. Playtime is very important parameter again. Ideally, for iterations, it should be around at least over 10 minutes. Ideally, it should be around in the range of 15 to 20 minutes. Again, it helps the game to be very highly LTV positive. IPM is another parameter that sometimes we see is being used. Again, it depends on the network the game is being tested on. So these are some of the parameters based on which the studio or the publishers decide whether the game needs any iteration or should we just kill it. Killing or thrashing a game is very important in this process, and we will talk more about it later on. So like I said earlier, we have made around 400 games and tested them with different publishers in the last 20 months. This is a small breakup, and this will actually tell you why are we focusing on patience and faith, because some of these numbers can drive a lot of frustration in the team, in the founder, in everyone associated, including the publishers. So in the entire process, in the last 20 months, we have more than 80 prototypes where the CPIs were as low as 11 cents, and they were in the range of 11 to 40 cents, which means they were good. They were not the best, but they were not bad by any means. We further iterated on them, and unfortunately, as we will see later in the presentation, for many reasons, we could not move ahead and publish again. More than 230 prototypes had CPIs of more than 40 cents, but less than $1. Sometimes the CPI, especially in holiday seasons, automatically is very high. But I would not say that this is a very good thing to have, but at least it gives you an idea that this is the most popular bracket. Anywhere between 40 cents to $1 is where most games lie. No matter how good they are, no matter how well they have been made or executed, or even if the idea is innovative, there are very high chances that you land up in this bracket. Even if you land up in this bracket, that means that you are doing something right, and you just need that extra push to go over the line. More than 20 games had D1 retention of 30% or higher. Now, if you see from the 80 prototypes that had good CPIs and we tested for retention, only 20 games had a D1 of 30% or higher. So the question is, what happened next? A lot of frustration. And the reason for a lot of frustration is that by the time the retention was on the higher side of in the higher 30s, the CPI, which was earlier less than 40, now was 55 or 65 or 75 cents, which is no good. So the timing is very important here. You cannot spend 1 month or 2 months in iterations in testing for retention. There are very high chances that your game will lose its marketability. To the last thing, more than 30 games had playtime of more than 10 minutes, which is again a very promising factor. And again, leading to a lot of frustration that if players are playing so much, then why are we not getting the right match of the KPIs? It is very important to get a good combination of these KPIs because one can be very good, the other can be very bad, or the other can be a little bit, uh, not so good. So still, you won't be able to move forward. This is the main reason of frustration for our company, for our studio. But we have devised ways to deal with it, and that is patience and faith. This slide is typically very important for indie game developers or new small studios which are getting into hyper casual games. It is very important to understand what are the good things about this industry and what are the bad things. For example, good things include things like the hyper casual games can be really, really profitable. If you get a good hit with a good publisher, then you can make millions out of a single game. It consumes very less time. It is very fast to develop. You don't need to wait for 6 months to see and test and understand how your game performed. It can be done in just like 6 days. It is very easy to develop and test. Publishers extend their support in terms of testing. They provide free testing in most cases. They provide a lot of tech support, workshops, and also guide you how to make the game visually and technically look better and better over the period of your testing. It does not require a great knowledge of C Sharp or Unity program platform, and it can be done at a beginner level of knowledge. Obviously, you need to grow and improvise yourself as and when you make better and better games. It is a super fun process. This is very important for me because whenever I want to do something, I have to make sure that I'm enjoying it. So, making hyper casual games is one of the best things that I can imagine myself and my team doing. Now, coming to the bad things about this industry or hyper casual games. So, we talked about it being very highly rewarding, but the probability of getting a hit game is quite low. Normally, people say that maybe it takes 100 games or 200 games to get one hit game. In our case, just imagine 400 games and not a single hit game. So, the probability is super low, and hence it can get highly frustrating when you have like super innovative good ideas very well executed but still you don't get a hit game. There is a lot of competition since it is very easy to make, it takes less time, the rewards are high. A lot of people who are getting into this industry are facing a huge competition from all over the world, especially from countries like India, Pakistan, Bangladesh, where we have super skilled manpower available at a lesser price. Now, one of the most important thing which is not so great about hyper casual is that the trends keep on changing every time. The moment you realize that something is trending, and if you spend 1 or 2 months behind making games around that trend, you will witness that the trend has already changed. So it is very important to keep up with the pace of the trending trends. It can really get tiring at times because imagine doing 20 games a month, 25 games a month. You have to manage everything, right from the artwork. Every game should look different. Every game should perform different because every idea is very innovative. It's not reskinning of any ideas. So it can get really tiring at times. Now, the most important problem that we face at BooBoo Games is that there is a lot of frustration which develops at times. To understand what is the cause of this frustration, I have tried to put down these 5 points. So there are ideas which are very innovative, which we understand that we have not seen anything like that in top charts. We have not seen anything like that in Play Store. We have done our due diligence. We have not seen anything which is anywhere closer to this, and yet this looks so good. What happens next? We make it, we execute very well, we test with the publisher, and we realize that it's people don't like it. It does not have any mass appeal, or it's a very niche topic, and there can be n number of reasons, but it just doesn't work. What is even worse is that when you see other publishing same game what you have pitched to a publisher or what you are actually making, we have experienced this many times that we are working on a prototype, it's an exact same idea, and from nowhere that game comes and becomes a top charting game. So it's very difficult to understand, and it is very common. It is if it happens with you that you are working on a game and suddenly you see a very similar game being published, then you would think that there is a loophole or there is a leak in my team, that the idea was leaked to someone else. No, because the sources of ideas are very common. The biggest sources are like social media, which everyone has access to. We will go in detail about ideation in the later stage of the presentation. Another important thing, which is a big reason for frustration, is other studios reskinning your game and improvising on it, and they get published. This has also happened to us so many times that we were the first one to bring a concept on Play Store, and we tested, we could not do well, but someone else came and took that idea and did it in a different way. I wouldn't say a better way, but it was a different way in most cases, and it ended up getting published. So just imagine, what would you do in such a situation? What kind of frustration level would you have when this happens with you? Now, when you have a very great CPI, like we understood that anything under 30 cents is very good, but you're not able to bring up the retention or the playtime. We have had cases where our CPIs was as low as 11 cents, which is unreal. But our retention never crossed 25%, because sometimes in some type of games, for example, in our case, it was a simulation game, we could not take the retention beyond 25%. The playtime could not be extended beyond 10 minutes in this case. So what do we do? It's so frustrating that you got 11 cent CPI, but you're not able to do anything about it. And finally, it's the other way around. When you get retention and playtime, but in the process, you may have spent 3 weeks or 6 weeks or 9 weeks, your CPI is no more 11 cents. Your CPI has gone from 25 cents to maybe 65 cents. So by the time you have the retention and playtime in control, the audiences actually do not like the game concept anymore. It's not marketable anymore. Now, it's very important to understand, how do we deal with all these frustrations. As you see, there are many reasons that can cause frustration to studios in hyper casual games, especially to studios like us who make like 20 games every month, have made 400 games and without any success. What we do is we follow these best practices, starting from ideation. What is important is starting in the right direction. If you think that you know everything, then it is the worst thing that can happen to any game idea. You have to understand what is trending, what is viral, what is topping the charts, and then you have to ideate around that. Source is not important. It can come from, like, for example, Squid Game was hugely popular in inspiring many ideas recently when it got viral on Netflix. It can be any movies like James Bond movies for action sequences, can be Fast and Furious or any such movies. if you're looking at a cool, animation and stunt based movie, it can be from current topics. If there is an election year or election time, it can be a game on election. It can be a game on event. If it's a Thanksgiving or a Halloween coming around the corner, you can have some ideas with that theme. And it can be on professions. We have made many games on butlers, on chefs, on doctors, on firefighters, on cops. These professions, there are many interesting things that you can do. It can be from makeup salon, it can be from nail art, or can be many things that you experience yourself in your daily life. The next thing is execution. Once the idea is in place, once the idea is curated and then it's converted into a GDD, it goes to the team for execution. Now, it's really important to have clarity, and you should be able to tell your story in 10 seconds, which is also a lot. In fact, in the first 5 seconds, you should be able to tell your story, what the game is, what the idea is. If you achieve that, half of the job is done. While executing, the quality is superly important, but I would also say that the speed is very important as well. And the biggest reason is that, like we mentioned earlier, ideation sources can be common. There are many times when uh, same idea is being developed by maybe 10 studios or 20 studios. There are many times when it happens when we pitch an idea to the publisher and the publisher comes back to us and says that we have received 4 such ideas and we have tried them and it did not work. So also it can be the other way around. The publisher can say that, which has happened a lot of times to us as well. When the publisher comes back to the idea and review after reviewing it and says that we are already testing something similar and it's in soft launch. How do you feel that way? So that's why you need to be very fast. You need to screen your ideas. Every studio will have a bank of ideas. You need to screen the right ideas with the best of your abilities and then immediately take into the execution. Polishing and juiciness, it becomes increasingly important these days to have juiciness in your execution. Imagine a simple game where you have some spherical balls, they are moving in a path on a track. It can just swerve left and right. Now the other way is that using dynamic bones or using some physicality, you can actually make it move like a snake. So that juiciness, it can be in form of the physics, it can be in form of the effects or animations, is super important these days for any successful hyper casual game. Now coming back to iterations. Now imagine that you managed to get very good CPI. Let's say you managed to get around 30 cents of CPI in your first test, and the publisher asked you to iterate the game with some changes you discuss with your team. Now it is super important that how fast you do them, because if you spend more than 3 weeks or 4 weeks on any kind of iterations, you have already lost the battle. We have seen in many situations when we were new in this industry that we used to take time in iterating things. And since the game is already tested, it's out in the market, it's on Play Store, it's in the US stores, it may be even on iOS App Store, and it's accessible by anyone. Many publishers keep an eye on what we do, many studios keep an eye on what we do, and it's very easy for them to pick up any idea from there. And while we are iterating, they may already be faster and move ahead of us. It has happened very recently to us. Again, a reason of huge frustration. I mean, something which we are working on right now. We need to increase our pace when it comes to iterations. And something technical, the code needs to be dynamic. Because what happens is sometimes we think about short term goals. For example, if we are thinking about only the CPI test or the CTR test, then what happens? Your code, if you code in a static way, and suppose you get a good result on the CPI or the CTR, you will have to make changes and add new levels and modify to make it even better, and maybe add some meta like a shop screen or some unlocking of levels, etc. Now if your code is not dynamic, you have to redo everything from scratch. That is the reason in most cases which takes a lot of time. So your code needs to be dynamic right from the beginning. It may take a couple of days more to make it dynamic, but that is the ideal way to go. Moving ahead, as important as ideation and execution is for any game, killing or thrashing is equally important. Now imagine a situation. The workflow is like you ideate, you execute, you test. If the results are good, you iterate, you test again, and then you publish or thrash. You don't have to stick to any game. If you tested, if the publisher is advising you that no, this game may not work, and we have tested, we have done everything, it's the most important thing to move on and try the next one, then trust them. Trust your instincts, but also trust your publisher. In another scenario where you ideate, you execute, you test, the test results are not good, don't waste any more time on it. Be data driven. Test gives you a data which is very important to understand that no matter how much you are emotionally attached to a particular idea, you should not focus on how good the idea is or how innovative it is. If it is not working, then it is very clear that the audiences is not liking it. A recent example is we tried a couple of games on NFTs. We thought it's the need of the hour. Everyone is talking about NFTs, and those games didn't test very well. And we were very surprised. But from what we have learned is that we just need to move forward and thrash it and kill that concept. The world audience is not ready for NFT games right now in terms of hyper casual games with an NFT theme. And the last thing is whenever you kill or thrash any games, revisit them at a later date. Because sometimes what happens is you make something today and it may come in trend 3 months later. So you have to be always aware of what you have done in the past, and you have to have that presence of mind that I have to go back to my old games, which may not have performed very well, but they can always, this can always change. The trend can also change in your favor. It's not always that the trend goes away from you. Now, one of the most important things, patience. You have to keep grinding. You have to have the spirit of never giving up in hyper casual. If you get tired, if you get frustrated, if you get annoyed, just remember that patience will lead you to the success you are looking for. That's what we are uh, having in mind, and that's what is driving us. And learn from your mistakes. Keep grinding does not mean that you keep doing on the same things again and again. You have to evolve, you have to transform, you have to learn from what you have done in the past, which could have been better. You see other studios, you see other publishers, you see what kind of games are topping the chart. You sit and analyze what is the difference between that game and your game, and you learn from that. Attend workshops, webinars by publishers. They are super important. We sometimes think that every workshop, every webinar talks about the same thing, but no, you won't get a content which is different for the entire span of the workshop or webinar. But all you need is that two things which can make a difference in your next game. So that is easily available, and you can really get it from any publishers you're working with. Understand the market. This means that you have to keep an eye on what's working, which you can get from top charts. At the same time, you have to keep an eye on what's not working. It is very important to understand what's not working as well, because you may be, in most cases, doing something in that direction which is not acceptable by the market. Similar to this, you have to follow trends. Sometimes it's important that you don't go for reinventing the wheel. You don't try to be a trend starter. Sometimes it's very important that if you follow a trend, if the trend is about runner games, you invest your time in runner games with gates or with collectibles. If the trend is about puzzle games, then think on the grounds of puzzle games. Similarly, there are simulations, there are action, shooting games, sports, everything. Now, what we need to understand is that this entire hyper casual industry is a game of probability. It's like a lottery. I wouldn't call it a gambling game, because when you gamble, you don't have any skills involved. But in hyper casual, a lot of skills are involved. At the same time, a lot of luck is required. If you make 100 games, the probability of success is maybe 1%. So maybe you get one game out of those 100 games. Now, if you make 500 games, that 1% probability makes 5 contenders. So it's all about quality and speed at the same time. Make in volumes, test in quality, make in quality. That's the secret of hyper casual, which we are following, and we are very sure very soon we will have good success. And the last thing I would like to talk about is faith. Having faith or trust in your ideas is very, very important. If you have an innovative idea, if you really like it, you have not seen it before, and you make a game on it, you make it really well, you test it, it doesn't work. That does not mean that your ideation was wrong. It just means that maybe the market is not ready for that idea. Maybe you want to test this idea later on, or maybe you just want to kill this idea. Secondly, trust your team. It's not important to have super experienced developers or artists in your team. What is very important is to have same mindset in all of them, and for them to understand what hyper casual is very important, because hyper casual is not rocket science. It's very simple, but to understand it, you need to have trust in your team that they understand it. You need to have internal training sessions, you need to have weekly meetings to understand what is working in the market and what has failed in the market. All this will help build trust between amongst your team. Trust your publishers. Sometimes we keep blaming the publishers for not getting success. We did that earlier. We thought in many instances our publishers could not handle the results better, and that's why we failed. But from the large picture, in most cases, I would say, in majority of the time, we are very thankful to our publishers because they teach us a lot. Small things can make big differences in hyper casual, which is super important to understand. And the last thing is trust your luck. It will shine one day. We are waiting for that since 20 months and 400 games, but we will keep doing it. We will not give up. We will get better and better every day with every game we make. And we will have faith in our ideas, in our team, in our publishers, and our luck as well. Thank you so much for your time again. And I hope I have added some value to your understanding of hyper casual games and how you can avoid getting frustrated or annoyed, and how you can deal with things in a better way. Again, I am available on Skype. Ayush.veritas is my Skype ID. I would be happy to connect with you and discuss with you at length on any topic or any questions you have. Thank you so much and have a great rest of the day and tomorrow. Enjoy the conference. A lot of learning is there, and just have a blast and make good, awesome games. Thank you so much.
Ayush, thank you so much again for your speech. It was really amazing. I've got some private comments from friends I know from industry being impressed with the numbers and approaches from your speech. So really people getting excited very, very much with what you bring.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, really. I have some other comments from guys who state that you have impressed them and brought practical knowledge to modify processes in their studio, and they have benefited from that. The process is similar to what you say. So yeah, you told a lot about testing and being patient, but how do you really know which idea should be killed and which should be modified? At this point, a lot of doubts are involved, a lot of numbers, some tell pro, some cons, keeping the idea. How do you personally separate the ideas worth the update from those who were be killed?
Thank you for the question. In fact, I think this is the most difficult process in the whole flow of making hyper casual games, because ideation is the foundation. Sometimes we see and we get shocked that something so simple works as a published game and gets so popular, while we have been trying really difficult, technically difficult things, be it shader programming, be it mesh deformation, mesh manipulation. So for me, for our studio, one thing that has really worked in our favor is that we work with a lot of publishers. So what happens is, the publishers we work with, the publishing managers, they are super supportive, all of them. So they help us in a great deal of screening our ideas, because they see and test maybe 10 times more than what we have. This approach is basically data driven, and we wouldn't have any more data than any of the publishers. So we trust their data and we trust what they decide, whether the idea should be made into a game or we should move on to the next idea.
Thank you so much. We have a question from the founder of Play Panda Games. How did you survive for a long time without a hit in terms of funding?
So we were so it was difficult in the first few months, I would say almost a year. But then looking at our quality and the kind of work we were doing, and we have come many times, we have come very close to getting a good game, getting a hit. But for n number of reasons, which we discussed in the presentation, we missed. So publishers acknowledge our quality, our work, and our speed, and they support us in funding as well. So we are very happy that we get all the support from all the publishers out there.
Thank you so much. Okay, one more question. Which trends do you see in hyper games industry growing up now?
It's very difficult to predict because this is an industry which changes almost every 2 months. So if I'll be talking about a trend, maybe it'll change in the next week because it's at the end of 2 months already. So we have seen a lot of runners where you have stacking mechanism, like in Coffee Stack. We have seen a lot of games, again, runners and platformers with those gates where you pass through the gates and you evolve and transform. So those things I think is still working. A lot of DIY has come into picture recently. So maybe DIY would have some weeks to go as a trend now, but it's very difficult to predict.
I see. Thank you so much for your ideas. I'm afraid we're running out of time already. Your speech was awesome. I would appreciate if you continue in chat, chatting with the viewers who is
Sure.
there and excited very much from what you brought now. Thank you so
With
much
pleasure.
and
Thank
have
you.
a
Thank you
great
so
day.
much.
Thank you for coming.
You too.
Bye.
Bye-bye.